My guest today is Daniel Mangena, a public speaker, best-selling author, broadcaster, and coach. He is best known for his highly successful Micro to Millions program, being the author of Stepping Beyond Intention, and his Do It With Dan and Beyond Success podcasts. After receiving a late diagnosis of aspergers and experiencing what can only be described as a life-shattering trauma at the age of 20, Daniel spent the next 7 years struggling to keep these revelations and events from spilling into every area of his life. In today's episode, Daniel teaches us his Beyond Intention paradigm, a simple 4-step system that began as a lifeline with grappling with suicidal thoughts and became a path to lasting joy and purpose. Welcome to Lifeology.
Thank you for having me, James. Excited to be here.
I am looking forward to this as well. That was a lot for me to read, but you've done so many different things and you have so many wonderful things to teach us. So I'm really honored that you're here today. From where are you from originally?
So I'm from East London in the UK, but I moved to Mexico back in 2018.
What brought you to Mexico? It's quite a change.
My friends invited me to come and look at a prospective location to teach a few workshops, 3 days to 10, and I just didn't leave. And that was that. That was the end of it.
I'm sure a lot of people listening right now feel like, I would probably do the same thing. So you've done, like I said, you've done a lot of things. I didn't even touch all the things that you've done. I know that you have so many different things that you are, so many different accolades, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before we get started, first off, can you explain to people what aspergers is? Because some people may have heard of that, but don't realize what it is. And I want to explain that as well.
Okay. So the most straightforward way I found to explain Asperger's to people is if you imagine someone that's autistic that can actually communicate with the outside world and has more of the mainstream wiring, more of the neurotypical wiring, but not all of it. There's some things that are still unplugged. Yeah. So for me, it shows up with the way that I think, the way that I process information, and the way that I communicate and connect with people.
What's that? Which you did very well in explaining what that is. One of the things that when you heard that, when you first were diagnosed with it, what was your response?
I was really blessed that the doctor that caught it, because I was 27 years old at the time, the doctor that caught it specialized at working with adults with autism, with neurodiversity. And so it gave a lot of context before giving that. And so I understood what it was before she said what it was. And so it was a relief to me because it helped me to understand a lot about myself, a lot of the challenges that I'd faced. And she really focused on what my superpowers were before talking about what my shortfalls and needs were going to be.
Wow. Really, really well done. So and I think that's one of the best things was when people understand how different we all are in many different ways, but to recognize that there's the beauty beyond it. But I think for some people, what they struggle with is all of a sudden that becomes the label. I'm this. So this is what my diagnosis is. So therefore, this is what I am. And we take on that identity. How did you differentiate between that to make sure that you are you who has this Asperger's?
Again, I think it really came down to the support that I received from Dr. Helen. She, like I said, she really, really focused on this is what's really cool about it. And this is why I think that you're going to actually thrive because of this. This is how this diagnosis is going to help you understand what support that you need and what changes to make in order to be able to move forward positively. So she really, really focused on those strengths and the upside. And then was like, okay, so these are the areas where you might need a bit more support. This is where it's been showing up for you in a disempowering way. This is how we can address it. And we did a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy to support in creating those frameworks and structures to be able to move forward.
Wow. I'm really glad that you had her. We all experience things in our life. You know, there's been really dark times in my life. There's been dark times in your life. There was some time when you really struggled and you had suicidal thoughts. You overcame them. So it's always really good to hear people who have been in the trenches, if you will, because we all have been there, but people who talk about it. And then to be able to say, this is what I did to get beyond that. Can you share with us some of the struggles you had and how you're able to find your way through that? I'm assuming it's through your paradigm as well, your Beyond Intention paradigm.
Yeah, so the paradigm actually was me going back over the journey and understanding the steps I'd gone through. And then I spent a couple of years kind of refining that and applying that same model to other areas that I wanted to create in my life. And then for the past 5 years, obviously, I've been supporting people through my work. But before then, I was really focused on just sharing it with people and seeing if it actually worked. Because it's very easy to have these crazy ideas that sound really sexy and they might work for you, but they might not necessarily be applicable to other people. And when I did see that it was applicable to other people, I started to share that with others. But for me, the key thing for me was understanding that everything that we're putting into our mind is either disrupting whatever program we're running on or supporting it. And you don't even need to have any consciousness behind that disruption or support.
Yeah.
If it's going to disrupt it, it's going to disrupt. And if it's going to support it, it's going to support it. When we apply a level of intentionality, a level of deliberateness in what we want to create, and then ensuring that the inputs that we are receiving are supporting it and disrupting the parts of our current program that are inhibiting it, it will always naturally lead to what we want. I found that out completely accidentally because I didn't try and dig myself out of a hole, James. I actually only didn't make a suicide attempt because I was so convinced that I was such a loser that I would fail, that I was scared to try and fail. And so I actually went off to do was go back over all of the personal development that I'd done, go over all of the reality creation, the esoteric stuff and the mystical stuff to understand how I could delusion myself and successfully pull off my suicide. But you can't spend 2 to 3 years bombarding your mind with positive content and not end up with a positive mind. And that's actually what happened to me completely accidentally.
Wow. I love hearing this. So individuals who have different neurotypical aspects, and that's just people who just think differently. It's always neat to hear how that's different in the sense of sometimes other people may think, oh, I think this, so it must be true. And so when that happens, we forget that, I may think this, but I can reprogram myself. So in psychology, we have cognitive behavioral therapy, which your doctor worked with you on. And then there's a subset of that called rationally motive behavioral therapy. So that basically says what you think determines what you feel determines what you do. And in order to change all that, you have to interrupt the thought, which then changes the emotion. So there's a whole equation there. When you were at your darkest time and you realized, I don't want to attempt suicide because I'll probably fail at that, what was it that on the other side that you interrupted that thought to slightly change that? Because as we know, the slight thought change creates the emotion change, which creates the behavior. Can you think of that one thought that really stuck with you as you worked through it?
This is the crazy thing, James. So all of this happened around 2008. I woke up in 2015 one day and realized I wasn't thinking about suicide anymore. I can't tell you what the point was. Yeah. But I was so, again, because of the way that my brain works, which I found out years later, I became so focused on this idea of working out what had gone wrong with all this conscious creation stuff, all this quote unquote manifesting stuff, which wasn't a word that was kind of flying around at the time and has become popular since. But what was it that had gone wrong so that I can fix it? And my obsession meant that I was just so focused on that, and all of the content was matching that the thought that you're talking about happened somewhere along the way. And I kind of just drifted into it. Because I wasn't having disempowering conversations. I wasn't talking about what the Kardashians were doing or whatever. I was just focused on this. That's all I was doing. And so it kind of happened in that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And so in psychology, we also talked about the sum of the group. So the people with whom you associate, you become like them. So Daniel, if you're a positive scale of 1 to 10, if you're a positive at 8 and I'm at a 4, we hang out, I level up to 6, you decrease to that 6 as well. So I think it's the same thing as well. You were surrounded yourself with all those positive thoughts, those thoughts of what is happening, how do I really understand that? And so you leveled up with that because you became the sum of the thoughts that you thought about.
And that's what happened. So it was a really weird moment for me because, again, I wasn't trying to save myself. And this is the thing that, unfortunately, TED didn't agree with my topic. So they didn't actually publish the talk. But I actually did a TED talk called What Suicide Taught Me About Life, where I actually went through this story and what I learned from it. But there was no choice for life. Life chose me because the inputs were supporting those thoughts that led to those emotions that led to that thinking, that led to the behaviors that led to life. Life followed life. And that's literally what happened.
Sid, I really appreciate you sharing all that you have so far. Can we walk us through the 4 steps of your paradigm?
Sure. The first step is accept. And the point that looking back, because again, all of this was like in retrospect, going through the process backwards and then seeking to apply it. There was a moment when I realized that I couldn't depend on anybody else in order to successfully commit suicide. Nobody could do it for me. And that became the seed of Beyond Intention in something I call common denominator theory. I can have 20 different situations and relationships in my life. I can go and try and exert the energy to change them all individually, or I can recognize that the common thread in all of them is me. And if I change to some degree, all of those things must change. It's the most logical place to start. So I can try and deny my responsibility to change my life. I can deny the responsibility for the outcomes in my life. But if I just come to that logical point of common denominator theory, I have a massive amount of power to change everything in my life. And so that's where it began. Except is I am the author and creator of my life. My choices, consciously or unconsciously, are leading to the outcomes that I experience. And if I start to bring a level of intentionality to those choices, I get a lot more creative power as to what I experience in my life. That's step number one.
I truly, I mean, I would love, once again, I keep saying I love, but I really appreciate the practicality of this. And so, yes, the common denominator, it's very true. I think it's, one of my favorite quotes is divided waters lose force. So the more I try and put out fires in my life, that doesn't allow for me to look at, like you said, the common denominator aspect of who I am. So if I can change my outlook, then like you said, by proxy, it'll automatically change it. So like those divided waters are no longer divided because it's all the intentionality is me. And in that, I will show up differently in the world. What's the second step?
The second step is clear, and clear recognizes that real change can only happen in a real place, and the only place that's real is now. And so what we do with step two is we actually acknowledge that if I want to make new choices, if I want to have new thoughts, if I want to have new emotional experiences, I can't do that if I'm mentally locked in the past or mentally trapped in the future. I have to be present enough to do that. So step two is the very practical process of letting go of the past and the future. So one of my teachers, Dr. Joe Dispenza, says that wisdom is the memory without the emotional charge. And Eckhart Tolle says a very similar thing too. I can pull the wisdom of the past without needing to carry the emotional experiences or to be trapped in the emotions of it. So it's not that I pretend things didn't happen. I take the wisdom, I take the learning from it, but stay present emotionally in the now. And I mean, excitement is another thing that pulls off into the future. It's not just anxiety, it's excitement. Yeah. I can be caught. I remember there's a line in The Sopranos when Tony gets up. I think Paulie was talking with someone and he said, remember when is the lowest form of conversation, and he got up and left the table, because even positive things from the past can keep us locked in a loop as well. So it's taking the beauty, taking the lessons, getting excited presently, not lost in the future and the past. And when I can do that, I can start to move into step three.
A lot of people hearing that may have got lost in that. So I definitely want people, if you got lost in that, because there was a lot of wonderful meat there. So I know you spend a lot of time on this, and we only have a few minutes to go through all these steps. So definitely rewind that and go through that as well. But I wanted to piggyback. I wanted to ask you more questions about that. So when you retrospectively, in other words, you look back in the past, they can look at this. You don't allow yourself to. You look at the data. What's the block that you use so you don't get lost in the emotion? For example, if my spouse died, and all of a sudden I am obviously just grieving that, it's the anniversary, what are ways in which you can look at the lessons learned from that? And this is a really difficult one, but then be able to not get lost in the grief, because grief has its place, but in the moment of learning, how are you able to, what are practical ways that people can kind of keep that grief at bay to recognize the learning of perhaps resilience, et cetera, and to be able to move forward in the future?
I think the most powerful thing for us to remember is that the unconscious mind moves at 10,000 to 10 million times the speed of the conscious mind. We're never going to be able to block it. And one of the things I think we get caught up in as humans is trying to control things outside of the pace of our conscious mind to control. Yeah. And so the thing I advocate is, instead of trying to block it, feel it, but allow yourself to feel it for the time that it's real, right? And so if grief comes up, grief is present now. I don't resist the moment. I feel it. I allow it to be a part of my experience. I allow that to give me the opportunity to reflect on the happy memories that I have with that person, the joyous times that we spent together, and I allow it to move through. I don't pretend that it's not happening. I don't push it away and block it. I feel it, but emotions move in waves, as you know, of no more than 60 to 90 seconds. And if I allow that grief to pass through me, it will go on about its merry way, and I can continue with my life, taking the time after that wave to deliberately go into the thoughts of what can I be grateful for about the time that I had with this person, the years that we had together, the months that we had together, the happy memories that we had together, the lessons that I learned that are going to carry forward into my next relationship. But there's no blocking, there's feeling and being and allowing, but not holding on to it so that we get locked in a loop of that grief.
A lot of people, there's a quote that says, trouble is inevitable, but misery is optional. So we also, in psychology, we also have what's called radical acceptance. You accept the facts as they are. You accept this, but you choose to either live in the misery of it, or you choose to say, yes, I feel it now. And my second response is, now what do I do with that? And so that allows you person to look at all the data points as they are, from their experience, this is really difficult. This is really overwhelming. Now, James, what are you going to do with it? So it's the same concept in a lot of ways, is to not get lost in the misery of it, but it is inevitable that you are going to feel it. So if we get lost in it, and sometimes we do, the simple response is, now what am I going to do? What am I learning about myself right now?
And that's a big part of step one of building tension too, that whole radical acceptance. It's at its extreme, it's radically accept responsibility for everything, even the things that we've got really genuine excuses to blame other people for. We still dive in and look for, where can I claim responsibility? Because within that responsibility is my power to create going forward.
I love that. What's the next step?
Step 3 is gratitude. But the key thing with this is it's not gratitude after the fact. It's developing a level of positive expectation through the process of gratitude in advance. So when I look at the outcome that I would like instead of, for example, the grief, or I look at the outcome that I do want instead of the sadness or the anxiety, I can start to connect with that with a very practical experience of gratitude. And that's going to be differently expressed by every person, because we all connect with the energy of gratitude in different ways. All of our minds work in different ways. In another pocket of my work, Money DNA, we look at using your love language as a way to communicate with your unconscious mind. Because the love language is an expression of how your unconscious receives and processes information and has the capacity to translate that into a deliberate message of love being communicated, right? So too quickly, not to take too much time on this, but if someone's love language is words of affirmation and I come home and I slap them on the bum and say, let's go do it, they're not going to feel the love. My physical touch love language is communicating to them, and they're not receiving love because I've not given them those words of affirmation. No matter how much they want to care about me, that's going to be lost in translation. If I come and say, hey, I just love you so much, and I'd love to express that through my love language of physical touch, there's a difference there. And the person, these two people aren't sitting there and saying, oh, I just got a slap on the bum and no words of affirmation, therefore I don't feel love. That's being processed at the unconscious level. To bring this over to gratitude, through the love language, we can actually understand how can we communicate to our unconscious mind a deliberate choice to move into gratitude for this experience that develops a positive expectation, that generates the emotional charge, that generates the thinking pattern, that generates the habits and behavior that leads to the outcome, or a lack of that inhibits us from having those behaviors that ultimately are the only thing that's going to lead to the outcome that we want.
Yes. And I agree with that. I really like, in fact, I'll have to have you back on a different time to talk about using the love languages for money, because that's brilliant. I remember there was a couple of years ago, I was going through a really bad breakup, and I was just so overwhelmed, and it was so devastating. And I remember this, Daniel, this was something I hadn't really done before, but for me, I have a really strong faith in God. So for everyone has different ideas of that. But for me, it's faith in God. And so I remember I was literally on my knees crying. I was so heartbroken. But all of a sudden I had this flip in my mind, and I was like, on the other side of this, you are going to have learned so much. And so I was like, oh, that's weird. I'm like, where did that come from? And so I was like, what's going on? And so, and all of a sudden I started to be grateful for the trial, or for the event, not that I want to go through it ever again, but through the event. And I was so excited because I was thinking, I'm actually learning and growing so much. So for me in my field, I've done this for so many years, but to have a really visceral response like that of, I'm excited about this trial. So to take the pain and now to focus slightly different on something of the gratitude, of the joy of the learning process, took the pain and used that energy, because as we know, all emotion is energy. I took that energy and moved it towards self-development. So as we know, grief has its appropriate time. But in that moment, if you can move it to that aspect of, I'm learning so much right now and I want to change, I want to be whatever. And so in that, the excitement of the trial allowed for me to process things in such a rapid way that it moved me into a place of, now pretty much every time I go through something, which once again, I don't want to go through anything, but when I do, I can flip it to say, I'm grateful for this trial because I know I'm going to learn so much on the other side. As we know, things usually get to the other side much more quickly than we think, because as we know, we emotionally forecast. Emotional forecasting is taking your snapshot of the pain you're in and saying that's how it's going to be forever. And so to be able to say, I'm almost on the other side, change that expression to gratitude, like you said, and all of a sudden you'll find you can quickly level up.
Exactly. And there's a whole pocket of the work that I do at my Alchemy of Abundance event about that exact thing, using the energy of grief, using the energy of fear, using the energy of upset, and using it. I got told there's an NLP term called emotion anchoring or something like that. We actually flip it. There's a process we take people through where we go into the depth of the experience and we flip it and use that to push into what we want to create. It's a really cool process.
Yes. Yeah, because it's a form of, since it is energy, it's learning how to use it almost like a battery to launch you into a different way, which is
exactly.
We have about 2 more minutes. What is the next step?
Yeah.
The last step.
The last step is listen. And this one's really easy. It's remembering you're human. You're never going to get it right every day. You're not going to be on point every day. You're not going to be happy every day. You're not going to be sad every day either. But if I think and feel with awareness, I can see when I'm off target. I can see when I'm off the path, and I can take that time through thinking and feeling with awareness to go back to step 1, to claim my responsibility, to go to step 2, to get back into the present moment, to go to step 3 and start to connect with what I want, and then listen in again, feel when I'm off course, because I will come off course, and then bring myself back on course.
Wow. There was, once again, my viewers and listeners, there was so much information here that Daniel talked about. So this better be one of your favorite episodes, because we definitely want to have you guys listen to it over and over again. Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on my show today. If my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you, to learn more about you, to learn all the things you've done, to understand more about the Beyond Intensive Paradigm and all the other systems you have in place, where do they find all this information online?
Dreamwithdan.com is the best place to go. There's a free resources page which will give them some more material around Beyond Intention. There's also my book, Stepping Beyond Intention. But dreamwithdan.com, you can find everything on the website.
And your podcast as well, then?
Yeah, everything is on the website. Social media links, podcasts, my blog, everything's there.
Wonderful. My viewers and listeners also know if they can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and I'll link you with Daniel Mangena. Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on my show today.
Thank you.